stochastic terrorism. This was a statement made by Police Chief Skinner of the Eugene Police Department in regard to a mural that had the image of a person who was killed by police. So stochastic terrorism is designed basically to inspire violence from one group to another. And the way to do that actually follows a kind of format of framing a conflict, establishing the narrative ethos, basically dehumanizing the antagonistic force, the target of your of the violence that you wish to incite, basically humanizing a victim of the violence that you're characterizing in your rhetoric, making a positive emotional appeal for the protagonist, making a negative emotional appeal, further dehumanizing the antagonist, and then importantly, not really concluding in any way. Okay, so you don't come up with a conclusion that suggests that what's necessary here is to get together and have a conversation, to further examine the issue, to engage in introspection. You don't do any of those things. The conclusion actually offers no solution. It leaves the victimized narrator protagonist in a passive position, basically in a position to continue to be victimized, and it leaves this sort of hanging in the balance, this sort of negative threat from this dehumanized force that the audience then feels a sense that they might retaliate for this violence that's been characterized, and then there you have it. There you have the action. So let's take a look at this specifically, and I'll try and be as brief as I can because I tend to go on too long about these things. But if we look at the beginning here, we're going to see basically an antagonistic force, the community-driven mural. That's the antagonist, and that is going to be pitted and framed against the positive, let's do this, the positive Eugene Police Department. We're going to see these two go back and forth quite a bit. So the police department is going to be here in the ethos. And we'll look at that in a second. We're going to have the other force here. The antagonist is going to be dehumanized here in this section. The narrator is again going to give some kind of positive sense to the protagonistic force here. There's going to be more positive for the protagonistic force, and then there's going to be a little negative here for the antagonist, and then we get to the conclusion. So let's look at this. The community-driven mural installed in the alley off West Park Street came as a surprise to us. So this is very common to have the antagonistic force, the victimizer, engaged in an action against the passive force. So they're passive, they're not doing anything. The police department has done nothing, right? They've done nothing, they're just minding their own business, doing their jobs, and yet this mural is doing something to them. The other thing is we background and sort of disappear the human actors behind things. So in this case, the mural is being targeted specifically, but the people who are finally being targeted behind a mural are the people who created the mural, right? So the mural doesn't install itself. There are people in the background. So you background those people and that's a way of dehumanizing the people, which makes violence against them, for human beings anyway, easier, because human beings have a kind of pro-social uh, relationship with other human beings. We're not actually antisocial, we're mainly social. So what's important to do in regard to the antagonist is dehumanize them, so that the people who are engaged in the violence are not feeling like they're engaged in violence against other human beings, but instead engaged in violence against dehumanized objects that are anathema in some way. Okay, so then Chief Skinner goes on. It's really important to recognize that Chief Skinner is doing all of this, okay? He is the actor and he's writing this, he's the narrator. And so this is all purposeful action on his part. Here he establishes the ethos in which he backgrounds the narrator and makes the narrator appeal objective, balanced, okay? So it's not Chief Skinner, it's not an I that's talking, it's a we. So he sort of disappears individually. He's not an individual person who benefits from this argument. He's not a person with subjective opinions about it. He is disappeared in the background. And that we, that narrator, understands the importance of art, so that we is very understanding, and its ability to bring communities together, so that there's an idea of bringing communities together to have difficult conversations. They're very open, of course, and we also understand, and they also fully embrace in a very kind way the need to provide platforms for multicultural voices to be heard throughout many art forms. Okay, we could unpack that more so, but I'm gonna try and go a little more quickly. Um, the the main effect of this section is to make the narrator disappear into the background and appear objective and balanced. And in this case, we have the repeated use of understanding, we have the use of community, we have, you know, capable and open of having difficult conversations, you know, all theoretical basically, more understanding. They're embracing and kind, you know, it's like a big hug. And they want to, you know, they believe in providing platforms, of course, and they can use the term multicultural. Um, so that's the positive ethos established. Now, the backgrounded narrator importantly projects negative motivation on the antagonist. This is dehumanizing, okay? So we're not actually engaged in investigating what the muralists in this case, right, the artists behind a mural, we're not interviewing them. We're not asking them their opinion. Chief Skinner is not reporting or quoting them in any way. He's projecting their motivation. And he writes, some images in the mural, however, feel very divisive. Okay. I'm going to point out again that this is a backgrounded narrator. Images don't feel divisive. People can feel things. Images cannot feel things. So what he really means to say, if he weren't backgrounding himself, was that I feel the images are divisive. But if he writes I, as I've already said, then that adds subjectivity. That adds a sense of subjectivity to the conversation, and he does not want to do that. He wants to keep himself backgrounded. So, which makes it sound as if this is an objective discernment, that the images are divisive, that they don't feel divisive, right? They're not feeling divisive to someone. They simply are divisive. They would feel that way to, in a sense, anyone, he says. And they do not seem to be in alignment with the goals, okay, in alignment with the goals of bringing the community together. We have communities together up here, and we have communities together down here. The antagonistic force, I'll make this a little X, is outside of some other group. They're an out group that is not in alignment with an in group who have common values that are in alignment. Okay, so that's a big word. Common values that are in alignment. These people who painted this mural are out of alignment. They painted the mural, they have images that are divisive and that are out of alignment. Okay, which is something that Chief Skinner is saying. He does not want division, he wants to be in alignment, but those again are assertions and um, negative assertions that he's making on the motivations of these antagonists who are being dehumanized by that negative depiction of their motivations, right? They want to divide and they want to be out of alignment, apparently, according to Chief Skinner. Okay, the narrator projects positive motivation on the protagonist and foregrounds himself, and therefore humanizes the protagonist. A police officer hopes to go their entire career without having to take the life of another human being, Chief Skinner writes. Okay, that's an assertion. Again, absolutely empty. Um, we can easily assume that if a person really doesn't want to take a life of another person, they might not go into policing, they might not go into the military. These are choices, for example, that I've made because I don't want to take the life of another human being. So I avoid professions that might lead me to that potentiality, right? So it's empty, but it doesn't really matter that it's empty. What he's trying to do is he's trying to create an image of the protagonistic force is in a way being kind of superhuman, right? I mean, they want to do something that's really almost impossible, particularly given the profession that they've chosen. And then here's Skinner foregrounding himself as narrator and associating himself with the protagonist that he's going to get to in a moment specifically. We recognize the trauma and sadness, we, the entire police force, when a life is taken, and how many lives are forever changed as a result of that deadly encounter. Okay, how many lives here is an important phrase because here, of course, this sounds true enough, I guess. I can't really argue with it. The first person whose life is changed is the person who's been killed, right? Their life has been changed a lot. Second is those who love the person who's been killed. Third is probably everyone, right? Everyone is affected by that violence and it fills us with kind of fear. And then there are people who did the killing, right? They're probably last of all, okay? But we're going to now, between this section and this section, we're going to drop out those many lives and just go to the 2 lives of 2 police officers, okay, who were affected, who did the killing in this case. Okay, the police officers and their families were profoundly impacted by the events. Sure, they were, but other people were, I would argue, pretty legitimately, I think, even more impacted. Certainly the person who was killed was much more impacted. The people who loved that person were more impacted. I mean, I can believe it because they've been humanized in a sense, as being sad and recognizing the trauma. But I don't know, that's all been asserted. Maybe, maybe not. Um, I, I just don't really know. The 2 police officers were not only confronted with their own survival. Okay, so we're basically told here that it's kind of a backwards way to say it, so that in this case, Charlie Landeros, who was killed, right? Charlie Landeros confronted the police officers with their own survival, right here. So Charlie Landeros confronted 2 police officers with their own survival is really how this should be read, but it's been written kind of backwards to disappear, again, Charlie Landeros, the person killed. Also backgrounded are all the people who care for Charlie Landros. Also backgrounded are the artists who did the mural. That entire segment of the population has been omitted from our consideration, essentially. But we are getting Landros characterized as a person who is confronting the officers with their survival, and we're getting the officers who are even more so, while they are reconciling. So we have one person who is irrationally violent in a sense. We have no context for it. And the other group is compassionately reconciling. So we have a real negative here and a positive there again. This mural and the choice to include certain images seems to contribute to the ongoing trauma and pain felt by many. This is the final negative emotional appeal, dehumanizing of the antagonist. Again, and with a very specific target, the mural, and the choice to include certain images. Okay, the choice is not being made by the mural, it's being made by the creators of the mural, is purposely, according to Skinner, um, contributing. So it's a choice to contribute to trauma and pain felt by many. We've gone from the many who were really, there were many, to a few, and now we've gone back to the many again. Um, but there's a whole segment of the population who've really been absent from this. So, and we don't get their side of the picture at all. We just get that there is sort of inhuman, um, you know, uh, choice to increase trauma and pain, which strikes me, frankly, as just irrational. I mean, whoever's doing that, it's got to be just horrible, right? That's according to Chief Skinner. Then we arrive at the conclusion where um, the Eugene Police Department here is committed to finding ways to be seen as guardians for everyone in the community. So now again, they are just wholly good, right? That's all they want is to be guardians, right? They don't do any harm. And we're open and available for difficult and productive conversations. They are, and they're ready, even ready to be, as I suggest, they leave themselves open to further victimization and all this difficulty, and seek to be a model. And what that does really is it brings up, we have this conflict, this larger conflict between the force of antagonism acting against the passive protagonist, and yet Chief Skinner doesn't really offer any solution for it. But along the way, he's targeted this mural and the people who've painted it with this despicable, out of alignment, and divisive aggression against the passive and benevolent protagonists cast in this piece. Because there's no solution to that problem, the audience, in a sense, feels called upon to protect this innocent victim. So the audience is called to protect the innocent victim, the police in this instance. And the way that they're going to do that is retaliate for this violence. Retaliation for this violence that Chief Skinner has framed for us, not that actually exists, and thereby find that as the solution to this problem. And the problem is other people, basically. The problem of other people with a different point of view. But that point of view is never expressed in this piece.